The untold story of Alexander the Great. The night before he crossed into Asia, the young king couldn't sleep. The campfires flickered across the plains near the Hellespont, and thousands of soldiers, battle-hardened men, lay resting before what they believed would be just another campaign. But this wasn't just another war. This was the beginning of something that would rewrite the map of the world. And the man behind it? He was only 22 years old. A boy who refused to be ordinary. Long before he became known as Alexander the Great, he was just Alexander, the son of King Philip II of Macedon. But even as a child, there was something unsettling about him. He wasn't just intelligent, he was intense. At the age of 13, he was taught by none other than Aristotle. While other boys learned to fight, Alexander learned to think about philosophy, science, politics, and the nature of power. Yet what made him dangerous wasn't just knowledge, it was ambition. The horse no one could tame. One day a massive black stallion was brought before the royal court. No one could ride it. The animal was wild, violent, uncontrollable. Even seasoned warriors failed. Then young Alexander stepped forward. He noticed something no one else did. The horse was afraid of its own shadow. Turning the horse toward the sun, he calmed it, and then mounted it. The crowd fell silent. From that moment, the horse, Eucephalus, became his lifelong companion, and his father reportedly said, "My son, seek a kingdom equal to yourself. Macedon is too small for you." A sudden rise to power. At just 20 years old, everything changed. His father, King Philip II, was assassinated. The kingdom was unstable. Rebellions sparked instantly. Most young rulers would have collapsed. Alexander did the opposite. He moved fast, brutally fast. He executed rivals, crushed rebellions, and sent a clear message. He was not a boy king. The burning of Thebes. When the Greek city of Thebes revolted, Alexander responded with terrifying force. He didn't just defeat them, he destroyed the city. Buildings were leveled, thousands were killed or enslaved. It was a shocking act, but it worked. The rest of Greece fell silent. No one dared challenge him again. Crossing into the unknown. In 334 BC, Alexander stood at the edge of the known world. Ahead of him lay the mighty Persian Empire, ruled by Darius III, one of the most powerful men on earth. Alexander didn't hesitate. He crossed the Hellespont with around 40,000 men. To many, it looked like suicide. The first shock, Battle of the Granicus. The Persian forces waited at the river Granicus. They had numbers, they had position. Alexander had something else, fearlessness. He led the charge himself, not from behind, from the front. In the chaos of battle, he nearly died, struck by an enemy soldier, but was saved at the last second by one of his companions. That moment could have ended history, but it didn't. Instead, it marked the beginning of an unstoppable legend. The king who would not lose. One by one, cities fell. Asia Minor, Syria, Egypt. When Alexander entered Egypt, he wasn't seen as a conqueror. He was seen as a liberator. There, he founded a city that still exists today, Alexandria. But he wasn't done. Not even close. The Clash of Kings, Battle of Issus. This time, Darius III himself led the army. Tens of thousands of soldiers. The stakes were everything. And yet again, Alexander did the unthinkable. He charged directly at Darius. The Persian king panicked and fled. A king running from a battlefield was unthinkable. But it happened. And with that, the Persian Empire began to crumble. The man who thought he was a god. As victories piled up, something began to change. Alexander stopped seeing himself as just a king. He started believing he was something more. In Egypt, at the Oracle of Siwa, he was declared the son of Zeus, and he believed it. From then on, he demanded not just loyalty, but worship. Some followed. Others feared what he was becoming. The long march into the east. Most kings would have stopped. He didn't. Alexander pushed deeper into lands no Greek had ever seen. Through deserts, across mountains, into India. His army grew tired, worn down, homesick. But Alexander kept going, because to him there was no enough, only more, the breaking point. At the Battle of the Hydaspes, Alexander faced King Porus, war elephants, monsoon rains, brutal combat. It was one of his hardest battles. He won, but something changed. His army refused to go further. For the first time in his life, Alexander had to turn back. The beginning of the end. The return journey was a nightmare. Deserts claimed thousands of lives. Supplies ran out. Morale collapsed. And the man who once seemed invincible began to fade. A death that still remains a mystery. In 323 BC, in the city of Babylon, Alexander fell ill. Fever, weakness, silence. Within days he was dead, at just 32 years old. No clear cause. Some say poison, others say disease, some believe something far stranger. The empire with no heir. When asked who should inherit his empire, Alexander reportedly whispered, "To the strongest." And with that, chaos began. His generals turned on each other. The empire shattered. But his legend, it never died. The Untold Story of Alexander the Great, Part 2. They said he had everything. Power, glory, an empire stretching farther than anyone had ever imagined. But the truth was far more unsettling. Because the closer Alexander the Great came to becoming a god, the more human and dangerous he became. The friend he couldn't save. Among all the men who followed him, one stood above the rest. Hephaestion. He wasn't just a general. He was Alexander's closest companion, his confidant, his equal, the only man who could speak to him without fear. They had grown up together, trained together under Aristotle, and fought side by side in nearly every major battle. Some believed they were more than friends. Others believed Hephaestion was the only person who truly understood Alexander. And that may have been the problem. The weight of becoming a god. After Egypt, something shifted permanently. Alexander began adopting Persian customs. He wore their clothes. He demanded the ritual of proskynesis, a form of bowing that Greeks reserved only for gods. To his Macedonian soldiers, this was disturbing. To them, their king was becoming something foreign, something unrecognizable. And yet, no one dared openly challenge him. Except one man. The philosopher who refused to bow. Callisthenes, a historian and relative of Aristotle, refused to perform proskynesis. To him, Alexander was still human, not divine. That defiance cost him everything. He was arrested, accused of conspiracy, and later died in captivity under mysterious conditions. Whether he was guilty or not didn't matter. What mattered was the message. No one was allowed to deny Alexander's divinity. The night of blood. Then came the moment that would haunt Alexander forever. A banquet. Wine flowing freely. Tensions rising. Among those present was Cletus, the Black, a man who had once saved Alexander's life at the Battle of Granicus. But that night, words turned into insults. Cletus accused Alexander of forgetting his roots, of becoming a tyrant, of dishonoring his father, King Philip II. Alexander snapped. Blinded by rage and alcohol, he grabbed a spear and killed Cletus with his own hands. Silence fell over the room. The king who had conquered nations had just murdered the man who once saved him. Regret that couldn't be undone. The next morning, the reality hit him. Alexander locked himself away, refused to eat, refused to speak. For days, he was consumed by guilt. But even that didn't stop him. Because by now, something inside him had hardened. He could feel it. The line between man and myth was disappearing. A conspiracy of shadows. Not all threats came from the battlefield. Some came from within. One of the most chilling plots involved a group of young soldiers, known as the Pages. Among them was Hermolaus. After being punished by Alexander, Hermolaus and others allegedly plotted to assassinate him. The plot was discovered, and the punishment? Brutal. The conspirators were executed. Some sources suggest torture. Others suggest something even worse. Alexander was no longer just fighting enemies. He was hunting betrayal. Everywhere. The death that broke him. Then came the moment that shattered him completely. In 324 BC, in the city of Ecbatana, Hephaestion fell ill. Fever, pain, and within days, he was dead. Alexander didn't just mourn. He collapsed. He refused food. Ordered massive mourning rituals. Even had the doctor executed for failing to save him. Hephaestion wasn't just a friend. He was part of Alexander himself. And now, that part was gone. A king unraveling. After Hephaestion's death, Alexander changed again. But this time it was different. Darker. More unstable. He began planning massive campaigns. Arabia, North Africa, possibly even beyond. But many of his decisions no longer made sense. Some of his generals began to worry. Others began to whisper. Was the greatest conqueror in history losing control? The final days in Babylon. In 323 BC, Alexander returned to Babylon. The city was grand, powerful, the center of his empire. But something felt wrong. There were omens, strange signs, warnings from priests. Some urged him not to enter the city. He ignored them, because Alexander had never believed in limits. The banquet before death. One night, after a long feast and heavy drinking, Alexander suddenly fell ill. At first it seemed minor. Then it worsened. Fever burned through him. Day after day, his condition declined. He could no longer walk. Then he could no longer speak. The silence of a legend. His generals gathered around him, waiting, watching. The most powerful man in the world lay helpless, unable to command, unable to conquer, unable to even explain what was happening to him. And then he was gone. Poison or something else. To this day his death remains one of history's greatest mysteries. Some theories claim poison, slow-acting, undetectable. Others suggest diseases like malaria or typhoid. There are even theories that he wasn't dead immediately, that he was paralyzed, aware, trapped inside his own body. Imagine that. A man who conquered the world, unable to move, unable to speak, watching his empire slip away. The body that would not decay. One of the strangest details, the untold story of Alexander the Great, Part 3. When the king died, the world didn't mourn. It fractured. To the strongest. In the final moments of Alexander the Great, as his generals leaned in, desperate for answers, one question mattered above all. Who will inherit the empire? His answer was quiet, almost a whisper. To the strongest. It sounded powerful. It sounded legendary. But in reality, it was a death sentence for unity. The empire with no center. Alexander left behind no clear heir. There was a half-brother, Philip III Aridaeus, but he was mentally unfit to rule. There was also an unborn child, who would become Alexander IV. Neither could control an empire that stretched from Greece to India. And so, the men who had fought beside Alexander turned on each other. The Wars of the Successors. History calls them the Wars of the Diadochi. But that name doesn't capture the brutality. These were not honorable wars. They were ruthless struggles for power. Among the most dangerous figures were Ptolemy I Soter, Seleucus I Nicator, Antigonus I Monophthimus, and Cassander. Each of them had once served Alexander. Each of them believed they deserved his empire. None of them trusted each other. The first betrayal, one of the earliest shocking moves, came from Ptolemy I Soter. He intercepted Alexander's funeral procession. Yes, he stole the body. because controlling the body of Alexander meant controlling his legacy. He took it to Alexandria, turning the dead king into a symbol of power. Even in death, Alexander was still being used. Bloodlines erased. If you think the battles were brutal, the politics were worse. Cassander saw the greatest threat not in armies, but in bloodlines. So he made a decision that would shock even hardened generals. He had Alexander IV, a child, killed, along with his mother. The direct line of Alexander ended, not in glory, but in silence. A dream shattered. Within a few decades, Alexander's massive empire was gone. Split into pieces. Egypt under Ptolemy I Soter, Asia under Seleucus I Nicator, Macedon under Cassander. The unity he fought for didn't survive him. So, was he truly great? This is where the story becomes uncomfortable, because greatness depends on perspective. To some, Alexander the Great was a visionary, a man who spread Greek culture across continents, creating what we now call the Hellenistic world. To others, he was a destroyer. Cities burned, thousands killed, entire populations displaced. The hidden legacy. And yet, his influence didn't disappear. It evolved. The cities he founded, especially Alexandria, became centers of knowledge, trade, and culture. Greek ideas spread into Asia. Eastern ideas flowed back into the West. This fusion shaped the future of civilizations, including the foundations of what would eventually influence Europe, and later, the United States. Yes, even today, parts of modern Western culture carry echoes of Alexander's conquests. The man behind the myth. Strip away the legend, and what do you see? Not a god, not even just a conqueror, but a man, obsessed with greatness, terrified of being ordinary, driven by something he could never fully satisfy. He didn't just want to rule the world, he wanted to outrun time itself. The final question. In the end, Alexander the Great achieved something almost impossible. He became immortal, but in memory. And maybe that was always the goal. But here's the twist. What if everything we think we know about him is incomplete? Because history is written by survivors, and Alexander left behind no one powerful enough to tell his story exactly as it was. Only fragments, only interpretations, only legends. Final line. A 32-year-old king conquered most of the known world, and still died wondering if it was enough.